Shout out to Blackie Speaks. He did a video. They just did Juice WRLD dirty. Yeah, his recent album, I'm going to say before we watch the video, my true opinion, trash. I thought it was garbage. I think it was a terrible way to end his career. It definitely wasn't a full circle moment. The label company that obviously owns Juice's products and his music did a terrible job. There was no creativity. There was no effort. It was just all just a mixture of mediocre unreleased songs that we all heard, which they did a bad job with that too. That, you know, was put into an album which was garbage. It wasn't good compared to all the previous albums, even the most recent one, Fighting Demons, I think it was. That was still better than the one they just released, and that one wasn't great. So, yeah, and it took them, like 3 years? Terrible. It's like they all like, oh shit, we're gonna release it tomorrow, and they looked at their clock and then they just grabbed it all and just chucked it in a massive album and just released it. There was no real production. W, bro, appreciate you, brother. Appreciate you, bro.
Juice WRLD and how they did him dirty. You might have heard or seen something about this. The other day, Juice WRLD's highly anticipated posthumous album, The Party Never Ends, got released. It's his 5th studio album and supposedly his final one, which is crazy to think about. I don't know how true that is, but it's what they're saying. This album has been getting teased for quite some time. There's been a lot of hype building up to it. Fans have been waiting on this one for sure. Now, the album ended up dropping the other day, but before we get into the album itself,
it was kind of trash, not gonna lie. There was maybe 1 or 2 good songs. I think Adore and Goodbyes, which was Kid Leroy, is the only ones that I enjoyed. And then there was Offset, which some people like. I wasn't too fan of that. And then I think it was Fallout Boys or something. That band, that was the other okay song. But overall, it was just trash.
let's talk about the cover, because this was a really...
And why we say trash is because the previous albums that Juice WRLD released were bangers. Like, you gotta remember, Juice WRLD came in a time before Red Pill stuff, before any of that. It was a real big time for, you know, for music. It gave guys, like young boys, my age, sort of a beacon of understanding what it's like to go through heartbreak and sad times and depression and all that shit. Am I saying that it was necessarily good for society? That's questionable. But it came in a tired neat, because you had that, then you had the Red Pill, and then you got us now, where we're in a religion, back in a religion sort of circle. But it was very important for the movement of men, and it gave us it was a beacon for a lot of guys how they felt. You know, it was a relatable music. Not in all aspects, but in a lot of them. It gave a beacon for that incel sort of heartbroken guy, you know? That's what the music was, and it hit home. It was catchy. It was good production, good beats. It was dynamite. Facts, Rip Juice? I know, bro. Rip Juice WRLD. Rip Juice WRLD.
Really big controversial moment in the rollout. The cover got announced about a week before the release, and honestly, it was met with a lot of negative reactions. People were saying it didn't look professional, which, looking at it, is a fair critique. Then there's a six-pack abs on a cartoon version of Juice, which a lot of people thought looked unrealistic and unnecessary. Overall, this cover was, let's just say, not it. Now, on another note, we also have to talk about the rollout, because it was a bit janky to say the least. This is something Juice fans were pointing out ever since the rollout started. The rollout for The Party Never Ends has been messy, to put it mildly. One of the key promotional strategies was the Fortnite collab.
Yeah, they relied heavily on that. Yeah, Fortnite's good and it's done really well and it's a great game, but you relied on Fortnite to carry your album. Like, it was just terrible. They didn't put effort in. They just purely just wanted everyone else to put energy in and for them to just release. That's all it was. They completely outsourced any sort of effort for Juice WRLD's final album. That's the truth.
Added Juice WRLD skins to the game, which, don't get me wrong, is huge. Not every rapper, especially someone who has passed, gets an opportunity like that. It's a pretty big deal, but outside of that, the rollout just didn't feel cohesive. Songs were being added and removed from the album last minute, like some Juice WRLD fans were mentioning on Twitter, just days before its release. On a serious note, The Party Never Ends rollout is really bad, Riley said on Twitter. It's carried by the Fortnite collab, which isn't enough. The cover still hasn't been
you can't
picked,
rely on that.
songs
Let's be real. You can't just rely on Fortnite. You need an actual good product to work. And it was terrible. It was the worst one yet. Like, how can you make his final album, after all the criticism you faced as a label company and as individuals that were releasing his music, how do you fail that terribly? Like, seriously, you did not care. You just wanted a money grab and fuck the fans because you were pissed off that they released his music in an unreleased fashion and leaked it. Well, that's your fault, because guess what? You weren't releasing music for 3 years. That's your fault.
Being added and removed last minute, just days before the release. People have been waiting years for this, so the disorganization of this entire rollout and release left a lot of fans frustrated. Then there's the track list reveal. This caused even more controversy because fans were anticipating certain records to be included, and those records ended up being left out. One song in particular, Rental, which is very popular in the Juice WRLD community, this song was produced by singer and rapper Season, and this is a song the fans have been asking for a very long time.
Exactly. The number one thing you listen to is the fan base, the community, the people that made him famous, the people that fucked with his music. No, you went against that and just released a product that you thought that was good enough and ignored the entire fan base. Insanity. It's almost like you had to sort of finish off Juice WRLD's contract that he signed. Probably had to sell part of his soul. There's a lot of leaks of that. When he probably signed a little bit of his soul, probably the final thing of the ritual was sabotaging his career. You selfish pricks.
Get cleared for the project, so once again, fans were left disappointed. Now,
Crazy.
when the album finally dropped, it was met with a lot of mixed reactions. First of all, like we said earlier, many of the Juice WRLD songs that fans have been begging for were nowhere to be found. Juice has so many famous snippets floating around the internet, and the demand for those songs has been building up for years. Fans were expecting this album to be delivered on that front, and it just didn't.
They also messed up a beat. I think it was Floor It. Like, the unreleased one's 50 times better than the one that got released. Like, they just... terrible.
There's the quality of the album in itself. I've seen a lot of mixed reactions, but for Juice WRLD standards, it was actually kind of low if you ask me. It didn't feel up to par with his earlier releases. The mixing and overall sound of the project was also heavily criticized. Fans felt like it was rushed, unpolished, and not a proper representation of Juice's artistry. At this point, a lot of people are convinced that his record label is actively ruining his legacy.
Yes.
That's the narrative.
Yes, probably. It's probably part of his contract. If he died, this is what happens, type of thing. You never know. We've learned a lot in the past 2 years or 3 years about this industry as a whole. Like, let's be real, chat. Let's be real. Some not adding up.
I keep seeing, and honestly, it's hard to disagree when you see the backlash. Even diehard fans who've been there since day one aren't supporting this release. That speaks volumes. Juice WRLD is not the first rapper whose legacy has been mishandled though. We've talked about this topic in depth over the last few years, and we've seen it happen with other artists like Pop Smoke and XXXTentacion. Both of their legacies have been, let's just say, poorly handled, whether it's rushed albums, unnecessary collaborations, or decisions that don't align with who they were as artists. The pattern is very clear. This is the same movie playing out all over again.
It's pretty bad.
Honestly, I'm not surprised to see this happening with Juice WRLD's legacy.
Yeah.
Granted, I'm not as emotionally moved by the missteps, if you will. Probably because I'm just not as invested as the day one fans. That said, I'll admit I'm pretty disappointed listening to this album. Personally, I tuned out of most things related to Juice WRLD's name a long time ago. It's just not the same when other people are representing him, especially when he's not here to have a say. I remember when Juice first came in the game, this young rapper singing his pain away. From the start, it was clear that he was special. Definitely a broken soul, also one who was leading the lost souls. Someone who carried a lot of heavy things inside of him. But the beauty of Juice WRLD was that he was able to channel all that pain into his music. I always respected Juice WRLD for his honesty, for the way he opened up and let the world see his struggles. He was a brave young man, extremely talented, and a light for so many kids who saw themselves in his music.
Yeah, exactly. Like I told you, in that era, you had X, you had him, you had Pop Smoke, and etc. That was a big era for those kids. A lot of people my age. I was only a young teenager at that time. I'm a lot older now, but bro, it was not crucial, but it was a big movement. It was a big movement for a lot of young guys. It really was. A lot of people got to relate to his music in some way. It hit different. It really did. And then they fuck it all up. Fuck.
For those who don't know, Juice WRLD recorded thousands upon thousands of songs while he was alive. The music we've heard doesn't even scratch the surface of the work he put in.
And we'll never hear them. We'll never hear them. We'll never hear the music that's unreleased. If he's got thousands of songs, ain't gonna happen. Apparently Chainsmokers have got unreleased music with him. Won't be released. None of it will, because the bloody label company doesn't care. It really don't care.
where the problem lies. This is how the music industry is taking advantage of a lot of artists. If you're not familiar with how record deals work, let me break it down. When an artist signs a contract with a label, the terms are almost always heavily one-sided against the artist. We've talked about this before, but to make it clear, most artists sign contracts that last in perpetuity. What that means is they're essentially signing away their masters forever. So whether you're lucky enough to live to 60 years old or tragically pass away at 21 like Jared Higgins, professionally known as Juice WRLD, the corporations own your work for an eternity. In Juice's case, from what I know, his family doesn't have any control or say in what the record label does with his music. The people who loved him the most, who truly understood his vision and his artistry, don't have a voice in how his legacy is handled. Instead, the people who are in control are often looking out for their own interest more than his. And this is why we end up in situations like these where a young, incredibly talented artist
and this is when you got to sort of talk about the ritualistic aspect to it, right? Because let's be real, if they're a label company, he's got thousands of unreleased music and he's got a big fan base, you do a good enough production, you can make good money. They don't care. They don't care. It's what's in that contract that they care about. Because it's not about the music, but it's about the influence and the power and the persuasion that that label company has for the world. Music is one of the biggest influences in the world, if not the biggest. The entertainment industry has a big say in what happens in the world today. That's the truth.
Juice WRLD passes away so young, and the posthumous projects released under his name don't hold a candle to the work he put out while he was alive. It's a tale as old as time. It's a movie we've seen before, and unfortunately it keeps playing out. The question is, when will it stop? When will the industry start treating artists with the respect they deserve, both in life and in death? The sad truth is it's never gonna change. I don't really think it will. There's too much of a financial incentive for things to be this way. You know exactly what you're gonna get if you put your hand on a stove. You're gonna get burnt. So it's up to the artist to be as smart as possible by thinking way ahead into the future and not getting burnt. Now these things become very complicated when the artist in question ends up dying at a young age. No one plans to die young, that's a fact. Juice wasn't planning to pass away at the age he did. The circumstances on a private jet ingesting those pills led to things ending the way they did. Yes, it was a decision, but it's so much more complicated than that, and honestly, I don't think this is the moment we should dive into that conversation.
Yeah, well, we all know that, it goes very far. Like look at Michael Jackson, look at Prince. Prince died a very similar way. Died a very similar way Juice WRLD did, and he was going hard against the label companies. They've got a lot of say, man. They're powerful people.
What I do want to talk about is that when an artist, just like in this case, isn't here anymore, there can be a situation where their legacy is handled the right way. You might be asking how? Well, let's just say it doesn't always have to be like this. Take a look at Mac Miller, for example. Mac Miller, who tragically passed away at the age of 26, is a textbook example of how an artist's legacy should be handled. The way Mac's legacy has been preserved speaks volumes about the environment he had around him. Clearly, there was a lot of love, care, and respect for his artistry. I'm pretty sure that Mac Miller also took some steps contractually to personally ensure that if he wasn't here, his work, his name, and his likeness would still be represented in the right way. If that wasn't the case, there's no way everything related to Mac Miller would have this overwhelmingly positive tone to it. An artist's environment is crucial. For someone like Juice WRLD, I can't fully speak on the specific people he had around him or their character, aside from Ali, Lottie, but yeah, we're not gonna go down that path right now. But one thing I can say for certain is that Juice didn't have the best environment around him, and that environment reflected in his mental state. He was deep into addiction, threw a lot of drugs in his system, and that was apparent even in interviews. I'm sure you've seen those clips of Juice dozing off mid-conversation.
I want you to describe that single and that track that we're playing right now.
Insanity.
It's heartbreaking. It tells you so much about what he was going through internally and the lack of a truly productive environment to help him navigate those struggles. At the end of the day, an artist's surroundings plays a significant role in their mental health and their career. Juice WRLD's tragic story is a reminder of what happens when those pieces aren't in place, and unfortunately, his legacy is being mishandled in a way that reflects that. It didn't have to be this way though. When an artist is in this kind of mental state, the last thing they're thinking about is what happens to my legacy when I'm not here. It's almost like they're in survival mode. You can't plan for the future when you're just trying to make it through the present moment. And that's not unique to artists. It applies to every aspect of life. When you're consumed by what's happening right now, planning for the long term.
Facts, but you got to sort of plan for the long term always. You always got to have a long term plan and put stuff in place no matter what, because things can just change tomorrow. Yeah, that's why you got to live in the present, but also prepare for the future.
feels impossible. So this conversation about why Juice WRLD is being done dirty, honestly, it's way deeper than most people realize. It's way deeper than, oh, the people who are in charge of his music don't know what they're doing. It's a matter of preparing for your life and what comes after. But here's the thing, when you're in a vulnerable place mentally, dealing with addiction, stress, or whatever demons you're facing, it's hard to think about those things. And unfortunately, that's when the people around you, i.e. the environment you're in and the contracts you've signed, come into play. Juice WRLD wasn't in the headspace to worry about his legacy after he was gone. I mean, how could he be? He was carrying so much weight, so many struggles in the moment. And
True.
because of that, there was no preparation for what his career would look like if the unthinkable happened. And now here we are seeing the aftermath. This is why this conversation goes beyond just blaming the label or the people in charge of his music. It's about the system that allows this to keep happening. Artists, especially young ones, are thrown into a machine that doesn't prioritize their well-being or their long-term legacy. And when they're in survival mode, they're not in a position
You
to
got to think
fight
about
for
it from their perspective. Why would it? You know what I mean? Like, why? Why do they care? Because they gatekeep the money. They gatekeep the industry as a whole as a label company. So if artists want to make it and have an influence on radio and mainstream, you got to sign that contract. You're never gonna change that system. It's sad unless we all stop listening to music of specific label companies and stop listening to music overall, which I highly doubt that the world can do. That ain't changing anytime soon.
those things either. So
Consumers don't know enough about this. It isn't in our face, so we don't care. That's the truth.
easy to criticize.
We care now because Juice is gone and it's affecting us, but as a grand scale of the industry, we don't care.
It's happening with Juice's posthumous releases, and trust me, there's plenty to criticize. It's important to understand that there's deeper issues at play here. This is a systematic problem, one that starts with lack of support for artists while they're alive, because by the time they're gone, it's already too late. And that's why we're having this conversation right now. My goal is to let artists and the public know the ugly realities of how things can end up when you're not in charge of your own legacy. If you don't set up things properly, others will do it for you. And they'll do it in a way that serves their interest, not yours. You want to make sure you set things up in a way where even when you're not here, you can trust that the right people are handling your work and your name. Because here's the harsh truth. You're often more valuable to the music industry dead than alive. At the very least, when you're gone, you're no longer around to fight for yourself or challenge the narrative. The saddest part about this conversation, though, is that this is supposedly Juice WRLD's final album. That's crazy to think about, but honestly, I'm not sure how much I believe it. Juice's estate reportedly has thousands of songs in the vault. If anything, this might just be the last album for the next few years. Record labels in general play the long game. They're not thinking about the next 5 months. They're thinking about the next 5 decades. And here's a theory I have about posthumous albums in general, and it applies here as well. A lot of times when these albums come out, they're purposely disappointing in terms of quality. And I think that's because the label is saving the best for the last. From the fans' perspective, they're hearing an album that could have been so much better because they know what the artist was capable of. But from the corporation's perspective, they're giving you just enough to keep you hooked for future releases. And because they
Yeah, but I don't think a lot of people are hooked to that. Let's be real. Yeah, it might be released. Yeah, we might get the hype. Maybe a lot of people will still listen to it. Possibly. I could believe that, but you would have lost a few people too, you know?
this music in perpetuity, they can also release it in perpetuity.
You know, these label companies have been around for a long time. Maybe they know that this will work.
His music will always be the content that brings revenue back to the Juice WRLD estate. 30 years from now, when today's Juice WRLD fans are pushing 40 or older with 2 kids and a house in the suburbs, these record labels are still counting on releasing his music, that's for sure. And they'll hold on to the catalog until the perfect moment because they know it's a never-ending cash cow. Artists like Juice WRLD, especially those who come from a generation fueled by social media, are in a unique position. Since Juice didn't have time to become a legacy act in the mainstream, his music will always be the content that brings revenue back to the Juice WRLD estate. In comparison, look at someone like Michael Jackson. He's the definition of a legacy act. His brand and name will always bring in incredible amounts of revenue solely based on his existence. Now I know this might sound like a crazy comparison to make, but it perfectly highlights the point I'm trying to make about how an artist's legacy is handled. Michael Jackson's legacy was built over decades of groundbreaking work, iconic performances, and a team that knew how to preserve and amplify his name even after he passed. It's why his estate still generates hundreds of millions of dollars every year. His catalog, his likeness, and his influence are so deeply embedded into pop culture that he's untouchable. And someone like Juice WRLD, who comes from a completely different era, I mean, he's in a completely different position. Since Juice...
Egonski, chat. Egonski.